Hello, Mark. It's really good to see you again.
Oh, it's wonderful to be with you as always. I feel like it's one deep conversation. We just keep going further in together.
I feel the same way. I feel the same way. And you were just said we were just talking about what's going on in the world, and you were saying that you're troubled by some people who don't seem to be paying attention or blowing off what's going on.
Yeah, well, I feel like as we get further into this, it almost feels like you remember Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's passages of grief and stages, and it feels to me like there are pockets of all of us that um, are acting that out. There are some people who are acting out in anger. There's some people acting out in denial. There's some people, bartering and grief and hopefully we get to acceptance. But yeah, I find emotionally it's very challenging to go out into the world um, and having people not honor what's going on, because I think one of the things that is so powerful at this time is that we are being forced and challenged to inhabit the ancient truth that all the traditions speak about, that we are each other, and when we take care of one, we take care of all.
Hmm.
And I think of the Hindu ethic, thou art that, which that's what, and every tradition has a different version of this. And I feel like I was surprised, I shouldn't have been, but I was surprised that so much of what we're encountering globally, emotionally, echoes a lot of what I experienced individually years ago with my cancer journey.
Mm. Could you say more?
Yeah, so on one hand, um, I remember this is over 30 years ago, but when I walked out of the doctor's office and was diagnosed with cancer, the door I had come in through was gone.
Mm.
There was no, the life that I walked through I couldn't return to it. It wasn't there. And I feel that's happened to us as humanity. Where we were 2 months ago, 3 months ago, that world is gone. And, you know, understandable as it is that we flail and we argue and we resist, and we're in the new world. And the question is, just like cancer for me was a catalyst, there's nothing holy about cancer, but always what is opened is more important than what opens us. And um, and so the question here is, what is this opening all of us to?
Mm.
Um, so I'm reminded of, which I talked about in one of my other books, but that the original definition of sacrifice, and there's so much heartfelt, heroic sacrifice going on in so many places and levels. And those acts come out of a soil of sacrifice, if you will, where that original definition, um, sacrifice means to give up what no longer works
Mm.
in order to stay close to what is sacred. So and again, back when I was kind of turned inside out and upside down and almost died, clearly there were things that weren't working that I had to give up to inhabit a full life in the new world.
Mm.
And so, I wonder what uh, what is it that no longer works that we are being asked to give up now? You know, what is broken that needs to be left dismantled, and what is broken that needs to be repaired? And I don't have the answers to those questions, but I think we're being thrust into those questions.
No question. Individually and communally.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've been going through my own, I'm sure you too, those of us, I mean, my teaching at this point in my life is my lifeblood, to be with people in the circles I've been blessed to be in for years is, and so not knowing when or if we can ever do that again in person, I've been shocked and grieving, and then at the same time, accepting and learning how to find a new way through this, what we're doing now, through Zoom and other things. And so it's just a mix, a roller coaster of feelings, which I think we're all going through daily.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, let's turn to your wonderful new book.
Oh, thank you.
Yet another beautiful book. I don't know quite how you do it, but you somehow managed to. And I'd like to focus really today on questions of love in many different permutations. So let's just begin with something beautiful that you write in the book. You say, we need to pry ourselves open and let the tenderness we were born with meet the world. We must risk being tender if we want to truly live. What do you mean by that? Could you say more?
Sure. Well, I think, in the way that the sun, which is a great teacher for us because it emanates light and warmth in all directions without preference. And I think that our spirit and our heart are like the inner sun. And so I feel like our job is to never let that light go out. And in a kind of paradoxical way, it's through the cracks in our humanity that inner light comes out. Mm. So we're worn by experience over time, over all that is not essential. It's almost as if, experience and suffering and love are to human beings what erosion is to nature, in a way. So, and somehow we're in this journey of being eroded of all that will wear away till we reach what won't. Till that all that's left is what's unbreakable. And so I think that the only way, in the Tao, there's one of the chapters where Lao Tzu says, the brittle and hard break, only the soft and flexible endure. And he says, be like water. And yeah, so our tenderness and our vulnerability are the life force, the adaptive life force, through which we fully live and love and receive each other. And I think water is a great metaphor. When you look at water, it's both powerful and gentle. It's clear. It's see-through and yet reflective. And it's also the one thing that water can give of itself completely and lose none of itself. Like it will receive whatever you put in it and not lose who or what it is. And I think when we can love and give, and I think this is important in this time, we're so overtrained in the mind. And certainly problem solving is a great tool, but it's not a God to be prayed to. And often when I've reached the end of my problem solving and I'm exhausted and can't figure something out, I've learned that all I have to do is give. And it changes everything. It almost like wipes my mind clean. So rather than staying stuck in my mind, just give. Give completely to whatever is before me. And I have new eyes and new ears. And something else has come in that changes, maybe even makes the problem that I thought was a problem no longer a problem.
And you can, exactly, so you can see the things that are supposedly negative or destructive or problematic are actually doorways to a deeper understanding.
Yes.
Yeah. I love what you say about acknowledging the worst in ourselves and how important it is to acknowledge the worst in ourselves and our brutality, as well as in other people, to increase love, compassion, and the capacity for justice. That really takes in the whole mandala of a human being. Could you say something more about that?
Yeah, I think And you know that there's so many people have spoken about, you know, Carl Jung, all about the shadow and all of us, and of course, you know, Lincoln talks about that famous our better angels. But if there's better angels, there's worse angels, and we have to acknowledge, I think, all of it, because when I can acknowledge and honor what I'm capable of, though I don't want to be, you know, that in a moment of fear I can be cruel,
Mm.
you know, in a moment of insecurity and impatience I can get angry and flare up, and but when I own those, then I recognize that um, that you're capable of it too, and everyone is, and therefore it opens my heart to more compassion, to more compassion, because so I think, you know, I think this was one of the, I can't remember his name now, but I can't remember if it's in this book or another one, but years, well, maybe 5, 7 years ago, there was a Polish film director who made a movie about how Hitler became Hitler, about the psychological development of Hitler as a college student, as a teenager college student, as a failed art student. And it was called Max, I believe the movie was. But there was a big controversy at the time. I remember a lot of people saying, well, why, how can you give all of this to, he doesn't deserve that kind of attention or compassion or interest. And he said, that's not why I did this. You know, he said in an interview in the Times that, you know, when we call out evil, we can call out Hitler or Stalin or Milosevic or any of the people who are and say they're monsters. That's the easy part. But when we trace back, you know, Hitler was a baby.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone starts out, and it's by, he was suggesting, which makes sense to me, that by 1,000 small choices, any one of us could become evil. And that's the power of recognizing, not once it's crossed the line, but before it crosses the line. And I guess this goes into what spiritual education is all about.
Mm. And so, how does that lead to compassion and justice and connection, as opposed to pessimism, self-defensiveness, and a kind of fatalism, which a lot of folks are dealing with now, just feeling like evil and negativity and destruction, cynicism can be seen as on the rise at the moment as well. So, how
Well,
do
yeah.
what is that tipping point?
Well, for me, and again, of course, you know, we're just comparing notes. I don't have any answers, but you know, I feel that there's a wonderful quote by Rilke. There were so many, but this one I hadn't run into, and it was, he said, "Let everything happen, beauty and terror. No one feeling is final. Keep going." And so I think the first thing that I'm learning is, you know, because those of us who are, and everyone is, but certainly in our calling, being sensitive and the life of feeling, um, I've learned after all this time, while I am so shaped by feeling, I am not my feelings. And what's a great teacher is a tree. You know, the life of the tree is brought into full view because of wind, but the tree is not the
That's true.
wind.
That's true. I love that. I've never thought of that before.
Yeah, the tree is not the wind, and it's likewise, we are brought alive by the wind of feeling, but we are not our feelings.
Mm.
And so, then all the meditation traditions invite us to get below the feeling. But as you know, as a full humanist, I believe it's through our feelings that our spirit shows. So I think that we are challenged constantly, and even now, you know, I think about how months ago, under all our drive and running and commerce and conflict and everything all over the world, and the silent fabric under everything in the of matter, you know, one little atom shifted in relation to the atoms around it quietly, and the coronavirus was born. And it made me feel that love has to move as quickly as disease. Give has to move as quickly as take. Care has to move as quickly as cynicism. And of course, we're human, so I will have, I've had moments of grief and even, I wouldn't say strong as despair, but certainly, you know, I feel like, the wind has been knocked out of me at times in adjusting to this new world.
Mm.
But no one feeling is final, and we are more than one feeling. And throughout history, we've had all these philosophies. The wheel of life, as just it never stops, and it's all of it. So, but we've had whole quadrants of it try to be frozen and then build worldviews out of it. So if you're on the top now, it's transcendent, it's wonderful, it's Shambhala, it's and if we're frozen on the bottom, it's cynicism, it's nihilism, it's pragmatism, it's fear driven. Yes, yes, and yes. It never stops. So it's all of it. And what holds all of it is the unnameable spirit, that we go back to that light coming out of us, that love coming out of us. And I think that we're challenged to endure our journey until love can show itself as the greatest principle.
Beautiful. And part of that journey, as you say in the book, is helping each other to stay awake. That's so important nowadays. How can we do that? What are some ways that we can help one another to stay awake, particularly in this crisis?
Well, I think it goes back to the oldest medicines, and the holding and listening, by truth. We're being forced to stop. I mean, it's interesting that we have been forced into a global Sabbath. And, I think back, Wayne Muller's book on Sabbath many years ago had a seminal touchstone where he talked about how in the Jewish tradition, the word Sabbath literally means the one day we don't turn one thing into another. You don't bend it, you don't manipulate it, you don't throw it away, you don't build it up, you don't turn it into gold, it is what it is. And then when we can stop, then it shows its sanctity. Its sanctity has never stopped emanating. It's we who can't perceive it when we're moving too fast or in pain or in fear or our eyes are covered over. And so we've been forced into a global Sabbath. And so we can help each other stay awake by recovering the fact, first off, that we don't know anything. Like Adam and Eve, we're here and we're starting over. And to honor that, to admit that, and therefore to listen to life, to each other, to mirror each other, and to help each other stay awake by truly listening, by one of the things that I think, which goes back to my cancer journey, is I back then, even I had good doctors and nurses and not so good, and all of them at some point, even meaning well, spoke beyond what they knew. Mm-hmm. So I would have whatever the day would bring, whatever the tests would bring, what was next steps, and then they would venture into what no one knew, which is whether I would live or die. And I find that's what's happening now. Like the news is really filled with people who are no different than us. And once they've conveyed whatever real information we have, then they're just spinning beyond what they know, except there's a camera on them. And so a daily practice, which I had to develop back then, but I feel like I'm needing to resurrect, is how do I discern what is true? And then beyond that, we're being asked to become intimate with the unknown, which again, all the traditions speak about. But we're being asked in real time, just say you don't know and you're afraid, right? You can do that on camera. That would be more helpful for us to be in that unknown and fear together. Because there's something about our modern mentality that would feel more comfortable with a dark known than to actually rest in the unknown. And so we have all these doomsday scenarios.
Yeah, yeah. That's very profound. And I don't think people recognize how much more comfortable we are with a known darkness than we are with a possible, freeing, healing unknown.
Well, I remember that, Kierkegaard said wonderfully that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Not anxiety like going to a dentist, but more that disequilibrium of well, I don't recognize this. Where my ground is not solid. Well, and I think of like fledgling birds, and you really think about it, they don't know that they were born to fly,
Right.
The parent birds literally one day push them out of the nest. They go, wait a minute. And I imagine that first moment when I think of Kierkegaard's anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. So they're like, what do I, and they start rapidly, desperately just flapping, not because they think they're flying, because they don't know what else to do. And then,
Oh. Oh.
that's why, okay. And that's the kind of disequilibrium of new ground that great love and great suffering usher us into.
Mm-hmm. Emerson called it the terrible freedom.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, that inside we have this thing that's just it's awful, and it's the ultimate opening and the ultimate impossibility. Yeah, yeah. Talk a little bit, please, Mark, about the orbit of concern. You mentioned that in the book. What do you mean by the orbit of concern, and how do we need to be aware of that in these days?
Yeah, so in a felt way, and that phrase actually came from a wonderful talk that President Obama, I still call him President Obama.
He will always be President Obama.
He will always be President Obama. And that he spoke about extending our orbits of concern and compassion. And one of the sections in the book, there are the 4 sections: our walk in the world, our true inheritance, which we could touch on, and then widening our circle, which comes from something that Einstein said, that Einstein talked about how we have this illusion that what's familiar is intimate, when actually everything is intimate. And our challenge is to widen our circle of compassion, so that the Native Americans speak about it with their worldview: all my relations. You and I aren't just family. The mountain is family. The river is family. The 7 generations are family. And so the similar thing that with the orbits of concern and the widening our compassion, which is really kind of where the book, and I know you know this too, these books, and that's why I'm able to write so much, because I write about what I don't know, which is a lot, and so there's a never ending terrain to write about, because that's how I learn. And so so I feel like I retrieve the books, and one of the lessons in this book, from widening our circle and being who we are and loving and really inhabiting our love in a felt way, is that that the walls, I think, when we can be who we are everywhere, then the temple is the world, which is the last chapter of the book. And so, yes, we train, we practice, we learn sanctity and intimacy and reverence in sanghas and sacred relationships and mosques and temples and elder councils, whatever you want to name. But I think the real goal is for the walls to come down, so we can inhabit. The temple's the world. It's not in a church or a sangha. That's the seed. Like the seed becomes the tree. Those sanctified spaces, the temple is the world, and that's what it is about. Our orbits of concern have to grow, and I think this is great love and great suffering do this. Not until I remember years ago. I'm 69, but I'm probably back in my 40s or late 30s. I was in a grocery store, and there was an elderly woman who clearly had a back problem and was very slow, and I felt compassion from a distance, and then it took so long, I honestly got impatient, not the better angel of my nature.
Mm.
And well, and nothing, just a moment, nothing happened. But then, within 4 or 5 years, at that point in my life, I was a runner. And something happened, and I tweaked a muscle in my back. And when that happens, like, oh my God, all of a sudden you can't do it. The bathroom might as well be China, right? And oh well, then I got it.
Mm.
Oh, then I got it. And ever since then, see, once the heart is open, once that orbit of concern is extended, you can't rescind it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the hard but beautiful values of suffering. So once having experienced that, then, when I chance to see someone in a grocery line who's slow because of a back, forget being patient. I go help them with their groceries.
Mm-hmm.
Why
Mm-hmm.
didn't I think of that the first time?
Right. You were too busy being annoyed.
Right.
Right.
So this is just a nice, simple example of how inhabiting our own humanity honestly, acknowledging our worst angels, allows us to, and when we do suffer, it allows us for our heart to expand. It allows another room at a time for the temple to become the world.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. You mentioned our true inheritance. I would love to hear you say more about that. That's the second part of the book, I believe.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that, there's this wonderful paradox in all of life that certainly we can learn from each other. And, I so believe in having teachers and not just human teachers. The tree is the teacher, the ocean, the whale. Um, and, and there is a direct inheritance of our direct experience of life that no one can teach us and no one can take away. And through the lens of that true inheritance, I can be the best student possible because I am then most open to what I can learn. And so, I think it's a question I often ask when I'm with folks in groups, ask people to reflect on or journal about is, can you describe one quality that you were born with that no one gave you and no one can take away?
Mm.
Just one. And then if you can, what would it mean to befriend it?
Mm.
And so one of the things that I open that section with is that it leads to kind of a description of what does it mean to be a spiritual warrior. And certainly there are lots of from all traditions. And so just adding one more take on that. And it led me to what triggered this was discovering that the word war goes back to an Indo-European word, wers, W-E-R-S, which means to confuse and mix up.
Mm. Mm.
That all war and all the conflict and violence that comes from war is the result of confusion. And so a spiritual warrior is one who is devoted to the clearing of confusion within us and between us. What that means for everyone, we all have to describe that and understand that and act on it. And so one way we can help each other stay awake and in this time of forced Sabbath is to, wherever we are in this time, can you describe what's one area of confusion within you, around you? And what can you do? What can you devote yourself to that will clear that confusion?
This is intimately connected to the Buddhist idea about ignorance being the source of suffering and the thing that blocks us from inherent goodness. It's confusion. It's not evil.
Yes, yeah, and I think in the Tao, I think it was Stephen Mitchell where I ran across where he translates sin in the ancient Chinese as it, both there were two things. One was opaqueness, not evil, like it's blocked, we can't see, and missing our mark,
Right.
missing our mark, and And so that means that, really all of spiritual practice is course correction,
Mm-hmm.
not elimination of our humanity, like we're talking about these things. So it's not, if anyone, were listening here to us, not, oh, well, I'm not going to do that, I'll get rid of it. No, we are human. We will always do it. But how do we recognize it, which is the work of self-awareness, and course correct?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
course correct. I like to talk about it as our personal practice of return.
Mm-hmm. Nice. You talk about the difference between the fire of aliveness and the fire of circumstance.
Mm.
That's fast. That's an interesting dialectic dichotomy to me. Can you explain that?
Yeah. Well, it feels, under all of that, and I'll get right to that, but under it is that every human being is an archetype. Everyone will have to both survive and thrive. And both of them are important. And if we only survive, that's freezing part of that wheel of life. And we don't thrive, what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
But if we thrive wildly without any respect and attention to survival, we're not going to thrive very long. You and I could have this wonderful conversation while crossing the street. If we don't look and see a truck's coming, there's the end of it. And so it's simple. And so one other thought, and then we'll get to the two fires, is that in order to survive, we have to develop a skill at risk management.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to thrive inwardly, we have to develop a skill of risk enhancement.
Mm-hmm.
Those are skills. There's nothing valued about either, but often we can confuse those, so now to the fire. So in the world of circumstance, in the land of survival, there is this fire of circumstance where, we can get burned, and we need to know how to douse the fire. Whether it's literal fire, you have to watch the stove that you light, or whether it's the fire of passion, or the fire of anger, or the fire of curiosity to the point that we're more curious than compassionate.
Mm-hmm.
I remember driving one time with my wife Susan, and we passed, happens from time to time, we passed a dead deer on the side of the road. And it had been slightly eaten by other animals, so it was open. And I momentarily felt bad for the deer, but I was more curious, like having a glimpse of the innards as we drove by.
Mm.
Where my wife, Susan, which is totally her, she immediately identified with the moment the deer died.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But my curiosity had eclipsed my compassion in that moment. So how do we douse the fire of circumstance? On the other side, in the world of thriving, the fire of aliveness needs to be fed.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to never go out. We need to put everything, our ignorance, our suffering, our insight, our learning, on it. As I often think that this was something else I've been thinking and working with lately, is that, the way fire needs wood, the soul needs care.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter what we care for. The soul, it doesn't make any distinction. It just feed me care to keep the fire of the soul alive while it's in you. And so I think one of the deep ongoing learnings of any individual is how do we discern those two fires? How do we not fuel the wrong one and douse the wrong one?
Mm-hmm.
And what does it mean very specifically in each of our lives, and how do we practice that? How do we keep the fire of aliveness going And how do we douse the fire of circumstance when it's out of control,
Mm.
when it's too much? And that's, I think one of the things that has been a great teacher for me in retrieving this book is that I before I fell into this book, I hadn't ever really seen that, and it's really helped me look at my own experience and my own inwardness and relational experience differently.
And I think particularly right now for people, because they're so overwhelmed with the fire of circumstance.
That's it. And we have to feed more than the fire of circumstance.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so we feed the fire of aliveness in a moment like this. How? But through care?
Through care. I mean, it's interesting because all the things that we all believe in and have learned from all the traditions are like, they're all described as artifacts, but now we take them off the wall of the museum and they're tools in the toolbox. Presence, listening, holding nothing back. I mean, really being present. You know, if I'm feeling overwhelmed by fear, how do I breathe and drop till I reach the point under my fear? Not turn from my fear, but, you know, and I think that's because then this is one of the things, again, that echoes from my cancer journey to now is in our sheltered time, I like to think of us more than sheltered in place as growing in place. And so there is plenty of fear coming in. When we meet it, how do we feed more than fear? And so one of the ways is to, you know, fear, I've learned, is to be moved through, not obeyed. Whenever I've asked my fear what I should do, it tells me to be more afraid.
How else is it going to stay alive?
It's not right. It's saying no. Otherwise, you're going to exile me. No. You keep going.
Right.
So you know, this sense of by letting other things in, by right side, you know, because I've learned here, and it happened back then, but now, every day, doesn't matter how centered I am, there's something now, usually from the news or what's happening because of all of this out in the world, that hooks my fear. Yeah. And I've almost come to say, where's it going to show up today? Mm-hmm. Huh? Where will it be today? You know, we have a very healthy dog who's our little dog child, and she rarely has anything wrong with her. She's wonderfully healthy, thank God. And she, you know, she had a kind of a stomach ache when this all started, and all of a sudden, it's not so easy to go to the vet.
Right.
What do we do? What if it's more than a stomach ache? And then, so, you know, and we got through it. She was fine. But then I realized the next day, oh, that's where the fear went sideways that day. It took that and it made it more than it was. And now I could put all of the fear from the pandemic into what if.
Right.
And so again, we're not going to eliminate, as human beings, I'm not going to say, oh, well, I'll never do that again. No, I'll probably do it today after we get off the phone. But the work of self-awareness is, I recognize this. Yes. Oh, yes. This is familiar. Mm-hmm. Course correct. What can I let in other than my fear so that my fear is in me and I'm not in it?
Mm-hmm. Is that part of what you call the covenant of practice?
Yes, very much so. The covenant of practice is a commitment not to have things figured out, but to stay in the constant learning of how we course correct, return to balance, which balance to me is not, you know, we tend to think, or I think it's a education to think of balance has often been said, well, I'm not going to be too high and I'm not going to be too low. But balance to me is more like a rowboat that's in the middle, the exact middle of a strong current. You could not be more immersed in that current, but you stay in the center of it. So it's more a matter of thoroughness than lopping off the fullness of our human experience. And so that's the covenant of experience, of practice. How do we, and it says there's a interesting paradox about practice, which is humbling, is, you know, and it's best understood through like sports, right? You practice for the game. The practice is for life.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, take Derek Jeter, who's no longer playing, but right, you know, one of the greatest shortstops of all time. How many thousands of grounders did he practice for the one unpredictable bounce in the game?
Mm-hmm.
So we practice, we meditate, we do these things. And I find that when I am so thoroughly, wholeheartedly in a moment of practice, the reward is it dissolves. It stops being practice and it dissolves into an unscripted moment of pure living.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reward.
That's the reward. That's the
There's
reward.
the reward. All of a sudden it stops being practice because we've inhabited it.
Right, right. And that's the seeker's journey, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I love how you say the task of coming alive and staying alive is beautiful and endless. I think that really says it all.
Yeah, well, thank you. It is endless, and and why would we want it to end? You know, why would we, I feel like I you know that all the things we're talking about, you know, if you and I were actors, you know, and a famous film director described everything that we've been talking about and then offered it to us as a part, we would think it was the part of a lifetime.
It's true.
And it is.
I love it. Thank you, Mark. That was great.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's always a joy to be together.
It's great to talk to you as always. So good luck with the book and good luck with getting through this thing. And I hope to see you in New York one of these days again.
Oh, me too. I hold on to that. I so miss New York and think of everyone there. And yeah, and blessings to you too. Are you working on something new right now? Or?
I am. I'm writing a book about Emerson.
Oh my God, that's fabulous. Oh.
Yeah. Emerson as a spiritual teacher, which it actually hasn't quite been done that way before.
Oh, well, if there's anything I can do to support you, let me know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, my friend. And so you'll have 3 books done by the time. All right. Be well.
All right. You too.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.